think it's 9 o'clock and it's the time that we set our meeting for today. Thank you all for coming. I am Chairman Barnett, Senator Barnett, Chairman of Corrections, and the purpose of this meeting today is to talk about transitional housing. We know that in the past we have had issues with those who are about to be released having problems with finding housing because maybe they can't go back to the place that they left. And so we're trying to make sure that we provide as many opportunities for these individuals to get back closer to them, where they left from or closer to family, and to make sure that they have a fighting chance when they get out and providing them with some type of housing. And we do know that traditionally we have used certain places, to be able to provide this housing, but we're looking past that and we're trying to look forward and to make sure that we use every entity that we possibly can to provide this type of housing to those who will be released. And whether that be faith-based, whether it be traditional or whatever, but we're trying to maximize every opportunity that we can to provide housing for these who are incarcerated. And we do know that we have some who have been eligible for parole, but can't be released because we can't release them homeless here in the state of Mississippi. And so we just think that this will provide us another means of making sure that we get them back into society as quickly as we can, as safely as we can, to make sure that they can be what we're asking them to be when they do or when they are released. And we do know that we're trying to also find ways and measures to reduce the burden on the taxpayers in the state of Mississippi as it relates to the cost of keeping these individuals incarcerated who can't be released because they have nowhere to go. When we talk about spending $30,000+ per year to house someone, then it's not hard to do the math and see what that costs us every month that this person is due to be released but can't be released. And I just think that it would be wise from the state's position to start trying to find alternative places for these individuals to go, and that will cost the taxpayers in the state of Mississippi less money in doing so. But this is the first of a couple of meetings that I plan to have before our session starts in January, so that we can possibly have some legislation ready by then to present to this body so that we can start to move forward in this process. And I would like to thank those members of my committee who are joining us in person and on Zoom today. Thank you all for coming. It is with their help that we have been able to do some good things in corrections and moving us forward. So again, thank you all for coming. At this time, I don't know if you all have an agenda, but we do have an agenda, and we do have speakers and guests. And I would ask all of the speakers to be prepared for at least 20 minutes, and maybe if it's that long, and then there'll be some questions by the members of the committee after each presentation and after each speaker. So the first speaker that we have today is Mr. Pedro Morano, and he's the Deputy Commissioner of Programs and Education and Reentry for MDOC. Mr. Pedro, if you would, please approach the podium. There's a green button on the microphone there that you will have to.
He cannot be here. He sends his regrets, but we wanted to let you know about what we're doing at MDOC. Mississippi Department of Corrections regarding transitional housing. Just to give you the numbers, we have currently 171 beds for transitional housing, and we have 6 providers: New Way, Gateway, Missionary, Friendship Connection, Buried Treasure Home, Crossroad Ministries, and Sober Living. Many of these beds are occupied, some of them are not. But we are in dire need of new transitional housing beds, especially for sex offenders who have a hard time finding them. And as you said, many of them cannot be released and they have to stay incarcerated, which is 3-4 times more the cost. Talking about costs, we are currently paying about $25 per bed or per day, which thanks to your efforts in appropriating the $500,000 from the Inmate Welfare Fund to provide for new transitional housing, these funds could potentially provide for an additional 55 beds that maybe could be distributed around the state. And we know that you're interested in, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, possibly group homes and other ways to meet this need. So we have some offers from different people. I don't know if the representatives are here, but we were approached by an organization called the Cornerstone Properties, and they made it clear that there will be no limitations about what kind of transitional housing they would offer, and they would include housing for sex offenders. We've also been approached by the Martin Homes, the Luther Martin Evangelistic Association, another organization out of Bakersfield, California, that is already working in Philadelphia, Mississippi. So there's a lot of interest in helping with this effort. I think we may need to explore with you and the participants issues related to leadership, stakeholders, financial issues, issues related to replication, monitoring systems, and of course, a possible evaluation of the initiative. So we can have maybe a formative evaluation going on parallel to the effort, and then a summative evaluation at the end to determine effectiveness and possible replication of this initiative. And that is the numbers. I have with me my colleague Nathan Blevins, who is also the Deputy Commissioner at MDOC for Parole and Probation, and he will fill in the blanks on some of this stuff, and then we'll be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Pedro, before Mr. Blevins comes, I guess my question to you is that you say you have 171 beds available for housing.
Yes.
These 171 beds not filled, are these vacant beds?
Well, Sober Living has 24 occupied. This is as of 2 days ago. 24 occupied and 10 beds vacant. Gateway Missionary has 26 occupied, 4 vacant. Crossroads Ministries, 25 occupied, 0 beds vacant. Buried Treasure has 6 occupied and 4 vacant. New Way, 40 occupied, 8 vacant. And Friendship Connection has 24 occupied and 0 vacant. They're located in Jackson mainly, but one of them is in Byram, one of them is in Madison, one of them is in Meridian.
Okay. Next question I have is that these facilities that you named, you just said is that most of them are located in the Jackson area.
Yes.
And there's another reason why I'm having these meetings is because we know that everyone that's released is not, doesn't live or wasn't sentenced in the Jackson area. And I think this is a problem that we've had for too long, is that we've tried to keep people in places where they don't have the opportunity to be closer to their family's old level. So has NDOC taken any positions? Have there been any thought through MDOC to start looking at placement of these people in other areas other than in the Jackson metro area?
Yes. We would like to have maybe 18 beds in the northern area, 18 beds in the central area, and 18 beds in the southern area of the new ones. Commissioner Kane and I went all the way to Kentucky some months ago to see some of the transitional housing initiatives there. They have some housing that has also substance abuse interventions. And there's a federal program that helps with that. So you can leverage state resources, private resources, and federal resources. So we've been exploring different options because we understand that the need is great. We would like to diversify all over the state. We agree with you that the inmates need to go closer to their homes or closer to their communities. So we are very happy to explore with you ways to expand the geographic distribution of these beds.
You mentioned the number 18. Why are we limited to a number like 18 when there's a possibility of having hundreds of people released?
Yes. However, we don't find that many people are not finding transitional housing. Some of them are not, and I have two colleagues here from my office that know the specifics of how they qualify for this transitional housing. They have to agree, of course, to go through the program. They have to agree to the rules. Some of them have to pay a small amount out of their employment. But unfortunately, we've asked around and nobody knows exactly what the unmet need is. It would be good to know, and we will be working with Ms. Audrey McAfee, who is our chief statistician at MDOC, to see if we can come up with some numbers. But for now, what we know is that some of them are not finding housing, especially sex offenders, but we don't believe it's in the hundreds at this point. Maybe there is some statistics someplace that we're not aware of.
Is there any other questions to Mr. Pedro by any members of the committee? Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a number given to us a couple of years ago, maybe even in the last year, of people who were in MDOC custody who did not have an address to go to. And that number was in the hundreds, if I'm not mistaken. What is that number today?
I asked specifically this question, and I was told that it is difficult to estimate.
I don't want an estimation.
Excuse me?
No, I'm not looking for an estimation.
Right,
I'm looking for a number.
right. Well, we will have to dig deeper because I'm not satisfied either with the answer I got. But we have two people that work directly with the transitional housing places here in Jackson and in Mississippi. And they have been able to find transitional housing for inmates for the most part. But we understand that some people are homeless, some people are going with family. So
let me clarify my question because I may have not stated it properly. There are people currently in the custody of MDOC.
yes,
That we were told within the last year or so that numbered in the hundreds, maybe the low hundreds, that were parole eligible, but the only reason they were not being released is they did not have an address. We need to know that number because that is a transitional housing issue. We're housing people who are otherwise parole eligible, but they cannot parole them to no address. So that's the very specific question.
yes. And I heard that number also, about 100 people, most of them sex offenders, who are not able to be released because nobody wants them.
Well, now again, you guys are in control of the data. So I don't know who you're going to go get the data from except MDOC, but sex offenders are not parole eligible unless it's a very old case. But, you know, we've got two different issues here. One is people who are parole eligible that are still being incarcerated because they have nowhere to go. But we do need some specificity on that.
Yes.
Because it determines what's needed, what's for funding. You mentioned that they pay a small amount. Some people do. Who do they pay that money to?
Yeah, I will get you the answer by Monday. I will work personally with the statistics people and see how many are incarcerated that cannot be released because of transitional housing. And make sure that I get back to Chairman Burnett and you.
Now, you mentioned that they pay a small amount. Who pays a small amount and who do they pay it to for people in transitional housing?
To the owners of the managers of this transitional housing. For example, with the Martin House, MORE, located in Jackson, they are able to live there, they work, they attend church services, and they pay rent out of their employment. So, of course, it's, subsidized rent, but they pay some so they can get back into personal responsibility and be able to get used to living outside.
That's an arrangement between them and the facility.
Yes.
What's the average length of stay in transitional housing?
The average
Length of stay.
length of stay.
Because the word transitional
Right.
itself is temporary.
Right. Well, 6 months is what people advise. It can be a little short, it can be a little longer, depending on issues related to substance abuse, mental health issues. But about 6 months is a good rule of thumb.
The number of people in transitional housing that are on probation and parole versus people who have flattened their sentences, who served their time. Do you have any idea what the mix is?
Do you know anything? Parole and probation versus flat time? Of course, flat time people, they just need to be released and they go wherever they can find, but we don't have the answer. We'll work on getting you the answer by Monday.
Okay, but the people that have flat time, they get released whether they have an address or not because they
Yes.
flatten their sentence.
Yes,
So they're not a concern as it relates to transitional housing at this time.
right. We'll try to help everybody, but we're more concerned with the ones that go through the parole board and others that need an address.
The $25 a day approximately that we pay per bed, is that paid based on a head count or is that paid on a number of beds?
Number of beds.
So whether the bed's empty or not, we're paying $25 a day.
I believe so, yes, because they can be occupied at any time.
Could you please provide the committee the list you read from earlier that had the names of the organizations with the number of beds and the number of beds occupied?
Yes, I was going to do that earlier, but
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. Thank you, Mr.
thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other members? Senator Wiggins.
Thank you. This has been an issue for decades, this transitional housing. Help educate me, because I don't really know. And so I have a two-part question. Why don't people out in the community or businesses want to take these folks? Like you said, they don't want to take them. I assume that applies to even other than just the sex offenders. And then my second question is, where's the families? And I'm not ignorant about the population we're dealing with, but most people do have families. And so where are the families and why aren't they taking them when they're going to transition for 6 months? What are the families doing to assist them in transitioning back into being good citizens? That's my question.
Yes, I agree that it's been going on for too long. The families, some of them take them into their home, some of them refuse to take them into their home. Some of the inmates don't want to go with their family because they came out of a situation that had to do with violence, substance abuse, mental health issues, family, disintegration, basically. And so they would, some of them have told me, I would rather stay in prison than going back with my family. Or if I get out, I need to go someplace else where I can start a new life.
So that when I was prosecuting and doing sentences, I had defendants I was prosecuting say that they would rather take a sentence and stay in jail than be released back to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Because other members of their families are in worse situation than they are now in prison. The people in prison have a better chance. We are educating them. They are getting bachelor's degrees inside the prison. They are getting trained in welding, and we got them, supercomputers to learn simulated welding techniques for the women, for the men. And so they need some transitional place that will lead them to a good job and a good life, not to go back to a place where they don't belong anymore or they don't want to belong. And of course, with the sex offenders, the problem is they have to be registered, as you know, and they are seen as dangerous. There's 40,000 impediments to former prisoners in the community. Some of them cannot get jobs cutting hair. Some of them cannot get jobs in other ways, in other things. They cannot vote. It's a very difficult process. And so transition is key. And we're trying to get them a place that is healthy, that is, this Kentucky transitional housing program is amazing. They've done about 15 of them now all over the state. The federal government pays $5 million to establish the building. And then it's a cost of about $800,000 per year to run the building for about 100 former inmates. They are run by former inmates who have been rehabilitated and they're doing well. So it's a very successful program, about 5% recidivism rate. So those are the things that we'd also maybe leverage with the funds that are being appropriated for this initiative.
No, I said I had two-part, but here's an additional question. Since we are training, and like you said, they're getting skills and work skills and things so that they can go out into the state and work, have we inquired of our, let's just say, private businesses that maybe would assist in either setting up transitional housing that they could then maybe even be hired by those businesses and things like that?
Yes, ideally, they will need to live close to their workplace. Otherwise, these group homes have to provide transportation because by law, there's a certain distance they need to be at from churches, from schools, from different institutions. But as long as they are at a certain distance, especially, of course, sex offenders and others, they could, if they lived close to their own workplace, it would be ideal. And
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is to Mr. Chairman, to your point that in my district, Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring welders. We're partnering with, my understanding is welding programs in the MDOC But if they're transitioning in Jackson, sorry, but 3 hours to come to Ingalls every single day just doesn't work.
Right.
And so if, I think that's an illustrative of what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, which is we're training them to be welders, which are in need, but they're not being located where they can go get it. I don't know how many welding jobs are in Jackson, but we know we need them down there. And I guarantee you that would assist us down there. But we've got to, if that's what we're trying to do, we've got to get them down there. Is that what, I assume that's what you're talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Senator. You know, we passed bill 2 years ago, last year, that will allow some inmates to be released. I mean, to be able to go to work here in the Jackson area as part of the pilot program that we did. And since we've done that, we've had industry from all over the state that has recognized how good that is. And they want us to, you know, basically expand that program to every facility that we have. But in addition to expanding that program, again, like you said, we have Ingalls who are on the Gulf Coast. We have other places that are begging for workers. But if we don't provide these places with somewhere alternative to go besides the Jackson area, then the investment that we're putting into these people who are incarcerated by teaching them how to weld and all of these things and only allowing them to a certain area to be released to, it's not doing us any good, it's not doing them any good as well. And again, that's the reason why I wanted to have this meeting, so that we can expand this to every place in Mississippi that we can, that will be willing to house these people, because for so long, I just think that we have limited that, and it's hurting those who will have the potential of being released more than it is in helping them. So thank you.
We agree. And MDOC, as you know, through the legislature, has a new program called MDOC Works, which the legislature passed the bill. And we have a new deputy commissioner, Bradley Lum, who's in charge of helping inmates get jobs all over the state, and especially in areas like the ones you're mentioning. And so he is working with employers, identifying jobs, training the inmates to fill those jobs, and then with transitional housing established in those areas, we can move them there and they can get to work. We've also made a big effort to get them documentation, because they were getting out without birth certificates, without social security cards, without provisional driver's licenses. And so now we are providing all those documents to them upon release. So instead of being released and going home or going to the bar and getting into more trouble, they can go straight to work and start a new life. So the whole thing is being revamped with the help of the legislature, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. We have two more, I'm allowed two more questions to Mr. Pedro from Senators Norwood and Senator Butler, and then we will go to our next speaker. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pedro,
Yes.
I guess, how much money in terms of the transitional housing individuals, the facilities, how much money is MDOC have budgeted to assist with that effort? Or is this an expenditure that the individuals that are released pay?
Right. Well, we have 171 beds. We don't have a budget, as far as I know, that is specific to transitional housing. We are working with, let me just tell you here, the 171 beds will be $4,275 for, at 25 per bed. So per year, 4,275.
1.56 million.
Right, 1.560.
And
So.
$500,000 on your 55 beds, so $2 million a year.
Right. So we have some money, but the inmate welfare fund is now something that we are using through the legislature to increase that budget. Because as you know, MDOC has some budgetary constraints right now because of the increase in the number of inmates. And so it cannot allocate more money from the general budget, but through the inmate welfare fund, we are expanding this initiative.
Right, I mean, I'm not really in with the answer, but let me ask another question, Mr. Chairman. How much does it cost to house an individual through this program versus how much the cost that to house an individual within the Department of Correction?
It's $9,000 per year for transitional housing as opposed to 30,000, 35,000 for incarceration.
Okay. So from a finance standpoint, doesn't it make more sense to the individuals, you're saying that individuals have a choice, some don't want to leave. So we'll pay $38,000 to house that individual rather than working with that individual, working with some of these facilities or transitional houses to make sure that that individual, that they would accept that individual or that they can work with the individual. I mean, we're looking at a difference of about $30,000 that the state's having to pay
Yes,
to house an individual that otherwise is eligible to be released to go to one of these, and I hate to say facilities, but one of these residents.
transitional housing, yes. That's correct. It's a big savings, and that's why we're trying to move them to transitional housing because they cannot stay incarcerated. It's not good for the state. It's not good financial responsibility. It's not good utilization of taxpayers' money. They need to be moved out from the prison into transitional housing or some other way to save money and give them a life. And that's what we're working on.
But with the mentality that you're presenting, it doesn't support the theory of moving them from the Department of Correction to transitional housing, though. I guess that's my concern.
Your concern is that there's not enough savings?
No, my concern is that there may not be enough effort that's going into preparing individuals to go into transitional housing from the Department of Correction. Because I don't want to go, then we're going to accept the $38,000 tab versus us working to make sure that you are prepared to go or helping you to want to go.
Right.
And looking at the vacancies here, you know, it's, and I mean, obviously the data is not good from the question that Senator Sparks asked. It just doesn't look like that we're doing what we can to make sure that, I mean, there should not be any vacancies.
Right.
Do you all do an RFP for, I mean, if you put out an RFP, I'm sure that should be, there will be providers on the coast or there will be providers in other areas. Do you all do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Commissioner Kane believes in dealing with the inmate as a whole. Mental issues, physical issues, emotional issues, spiritual issues. So we are preparing them to get out into transitional housing and be successful. We are giving them education. We've delivered $2 million in equipment, automotive lifts, welding simulators, every kind of education. We're building even a church inside the prison for them to be able to, worship in whatever religion they have. So we're trying to deal with them in a comprehensive way, help them with interviewing skills, their curriculum, employment skills. So when they get out to transitional housing, they can be successful. It's a process, of course, but from what we've seen, administrative remedies have been reduced, violence has been reduced. There's a new environment in the prisons, and so the effect of the changes are being felt. We're not there yet, but we are working hard to help them get back on their feet.
I rest my case, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is kind of in line with Senator Norwood. What does it take to establish a transitional housing unit?
Well, we need to have the contracting process, the request for proposal. We have bidders. We have the money now. There will be a pre-selection committee based on quality, services, leadership issues, whether they have a good facility, whether they have a good track record. And then, of course, the providers are selected, not only based on how much they want to charge or money issues, but also quality. And then, of course, they have to prove some effectiveness that they are working to help the inmates or the former inmates, and that they are successful in getting them back, not only to jobs, but retention. Right? It's easy to get a job and lose it in 2 weeks. But if they have retention for 6 months or a year, then it's more successful. So we look at all those issues.
All right, do we have anybody lined up? Do you have anybody lined up that's interested in doing this?
Yes, we have at least 4 organizations. One in Philadelphia, Mississippi. We have this Martin Homes, we have Cornerstone, we have this Martin Evangelistic Association. There was another group that came out of Chicago offering to help with transitional housing. So the contracting process will start soon. I think it's due in a few months. And so we'll try to get the best bidders possible and allocate the resources to the best possible providers.
Okay, where would they be located?
Well, as Chairman Barnett said, we want them to be located where the need is, and as the other senators said, where the jobs are, where there's a chance for them to succeed, not just wherever. I mean, right now, the problem is that this has been going on for a very long time, and sometimes you have to go with the existing providers. And people get used to that. There's an inertia going on in some places that it doesn't allow for a fast change. Right? But we're trying to change that and say, we are gonna go where the jobs are, where success is possible, not just where the providers are. This is a free country and there are many providers and we don't have to go with the same ones.
Okay, Senator mentioned a while ago, just like down there on the coast, with Ingalls, lots of jobs, opportunity. Would that be maybe a spot that you would definitely look at?
Yes.
Someone there?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we are training many welders. The women got tired of, doing haircuts and horticulture, and they wanted to be welders, and now many of them are becoming welders, and the men too. So, and they can go work there.
Okay, so when you hire a company to come in and do that, I'm sure you look at their track record, look at what they've done in the past, all those kind of things, and
Yes.
see before you hire. But so of course, I guess my biggest concern is that, and I think the chairman mentioned this earlier also, is that I think the focus needs not to be in the Jackson metro area.
Right.
We need to stretch it out both ways, north and
Yes.
south,
Yes.
to make sure that those opportunities are available.
Yes. The commissioner has decentralized MDOC. Everything was used to be concentrated in Jackson. All the instructives were from Jackson. Everybody was waiting to hear from Jackson. The commissioner has made the superintendents and the wardens all over the state the leaders of the facilities. They have responsibility for each facility succeeding. And so each one, somebody was calling them the mayor or something. they are supposed to have everyone working hard, the inmates occupied, the case managers checking on everyone, the medical doctors checking, everybody working very, very hard for their success. And as you know, the commissioner has done this before in Louisiana, and his goal is to have every inmate become successful. The ones that get out, get a job, stay out. The ones that are inside become instructors to the other inmates. So that's why we're training the inmates to be the instructors, because in the past, only the volunteers were the instructors coming from the outside. And when the volunteers left, the inmates had nothing to do. Now the inmates are instructors on welding, on GEDs, on all kinds of other things. Some of them have bachelor's degrees inside the prison, and they are staying for 10, 15 years. So we have a workforce inside that we don't have to pay for, and that they know all the other inmates. And that's what's producing the transformation. Everybody's busy or needs to be busy. Nobody needs to be sleeping all day anymore. We want every one of them to be busy.
Okay, and they may have answered it, Mr. Chairman, and so if you right now, if, just say if you get these companies in for transitional housing, do you have inmates like ready to go now?
Are they ready to
go
go?
into the program now?
Some of them have told us that they're ready, yes. And the money is appropriated, so as soon as the, contracting, the RFP process is done, we can move with it. We want to implement immediately.
How many would you say?
How many
That's
beds?
ready, yeah, that's ready to go in the program now.
Well, we would like to get the 55 going as soon as possible, and then maybe more. But at least 55, since we have the $500,000 allocated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all for your question. Mr. Pedro, before you go, I heard you talk about these contracts, but that goes back to my original concern about transitional housing. You only mentioned a few organizations, but I didn't hear you say anything about you all reaching out to others that could provide services like faith-based organizations,
Yes.
churches and all of these, because if we continue to do what you were talking about doing this, then it's still only going to be limited to a certain amount of people to provide the services.
Right.
And that's something that we have to, that's something that we need to be pushing away from, is to make sure that everybody that can have, and has the ability to assist needs to be assisted. So
Yes.
the list you gave us is good, but I want to see where there has been some work with you all to making sure that you have reached out to faith-based organizations and others inside the state of Mississippi.
Yes.
I heard you talk about California and Chicago and these places. Well, we have people inside the state of Mississippi that can provide the same services, but we don't have to take taxpayer dollars outside the state of Mississippi to pay other people to come in, where we have providers inside the state that can do the same or provide the same services.
Yes, we agree with you wholeheartedly, and we believe in the work that the community-based and faith-based organizations are doing. They are actually the most effective nationally, and it's been proven through all kinds of studies that they have great effectiveness. The issue, Chairman, is we need to have an RFP that is well-crafted. And of course, we're not gonna favor anybody because I've been to other states where sometimes RFPs,
I know that we allocated the money.
right,
Money is there. But I don't want to rush it and spend it right now because it's there. I
Yeah.
want us to take our time and make sure that we get this right.
yes,
Because I think that's the problem, is that we have been too focused on rushing things to try and satisfy a few people to say that we've done something.
yes,
And we need to take our time and make sure that we satisfy all of the people and say that we've done it right.
yes,
So if you all are rushing or running to try to get a RFP for November and we get it halfway right, I'd rather you wait.
yes,
The money's there, it's not going anywhere. And let's get this right, even if it takes us to January, let's get this right. I don't want to keep coming back, and I know the people on my committee, we don't want to keep coming back to talk about this same thing. We want to be able to come back and talk about how good it was and how we got it right the first time. So
I agree.
So I'm not buying into this thing that, well, we got the money, we got to get 55 in there.
Yes,
And we know that there's a greater number other than 55 that needs this, and there's other people across the state. But thank you for your time, Mr. Pedro, but we have other presenters who are here
Sure.
that we need to hear from today. And we appreciate your time. And I would like to have that number sooner than Monday as to how many people are still in MDOC custody that could be released, but they're not because they have nowhere to go.
I'll try to get to you by tomorrow, and we'll hear you loud and clear. We'll make sure the RFP reflects your desires and that it's fair and open to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Mr. Nathan Blevins, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Community Corrections.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank y'all for having me today. I just found out I was supposed to be here like yesterday evening when Grace called me. So I don't have numbers and stats, but I will try to answer any questions you might have. And to let you know my role in dealing with the transitional housing. I'm over all the law enforcement in the state. So we pretty much enforce the rules of the transitional housing, make sure they're following the rules and the regulations and policies. I know we touched on some things about, now I used to be involved in the transitional houses when I first got started. And going back to what you was talking about, Senator, that was one of my concerns when I first started, is that all the houses was centered in Jackson. And we all know that people are being released all over the state. We know that. So it was doing a disservice for the people who had, I guess, support like on the coast up north, that they didn't have family that was close by that could deal with them. So that's something we've took into consideration. And when the commissioner actually assigned Bradley Lum, who was really supposed to be here today, but he had a conflict, he's with the commissioner. He's really the one that's handling the transitional housing now. And he's doing things in the community and all over the state, making connections as to what you referred to earlier about the faith-based organizations and all that. So I think once you get with him and talk with him, some of the things that DC Pedro mentioned, he will be able to clarify for you. So, but to answer your question, the RFPs is handled by our contract department. I can tell you this just from meeting with the commissioner and everyone, they're looking to expand. And that's what he's actually got DC Lum doing, is going out and seeing where can we go with this? What can we do with this? So I'm not really in those conversations of budget and who we're gonna go with, but I know in some of the meetings, our direction is we're in the same direction as what you was referring to. So just to clear up a few things that I am aware of that was mentioned earlier, we used to contract with a couple facilities, okay? When I first got here, and I'm just the type of person to shoot straight, my goal was to go in and make sure that these people that was going to these transitional housing, they was getting the things that we signed up for them to get, contracted to do, the programming and working and all that stuff, okay? And two, to make sure that the communication was there. When something wasn't going right, we were notified. So there were some times where we've had to have meetings, and I've talked to people. There's some people that we're no longer contracted with because they wouldn't meet those standards. And there's some that, after we talked and met with them, they did what they had to do to get things fixed. So I think the transitional house is a good thing. Me being in probation parole for over 25 years, it's a lot I've seen on the outside. People getting out, don't have places to go. To the senator's question where he was saying about the families, why the people don't have anywhere to go, why they don't want them. Well, a lot of these people are repeat offenders, and they've done things to their own family to where they just don't want them back, okay? So those are the people we try to focus on, and the sex offenders. That's really, it's a tall task, but I think with all of us together, we can get things in place that can assist, because at the end of the day, these people are getting out, and they're going back where they come from. So, and that's the commissioner's stance. I got to put things in place to make them better when they're released. That's why he has the training going on. He mentioned the welders. He's got a system in place where they're reviewing so many inmates within, I think it's 2 years or a year prior to release, to make sure they have certain things when they're released: driver's license, social security cards, some type of training or skill. Even if they're getting out without an address, at least through connections, we could possibly find them something to do or somewhere to go. So with that being said, I open it up to try to answer or clarify any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Commissioner, the sex offenders keep getting mentioned. Are we giving transitional housing or providing transitional housing to people who have flattened their time, who've ended their sentence?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we are.
All right. So you don't have responsibility to monitor everyone who is maybe in transitional housing, or are you saying those people have post-release supervision obligations?
Well, a lot of them have supervision after release, and that's why we still have to supervise them to make sure they don't walk off or to, things of that nature. So yes, we still have to supervise those when they're released. The majority of them do have some type of post-release supervision or ERS or what have you.
And as far as when people come in, and I know this is not really in your area, but, and I may should have asked Mr. Moreno, but everything's supposed to start with a case plan. And part of that case plan, I would assume, would be, where can I go when I finish my sentence? What
Absolutely.
are my job skills? And so when we reach the end of that sentence and we go back to that case plan, people have a freedom to live wherever they want to within the state of Mississippi, or leave the state, I guess, within some level of agreement. But we want to set them up for success. Sometimes they don't need to go home. Sometimes they need a new start. Maybe an opportunity at a place like Ingalls would change their life. So I hope we're incorporating that in our, not only in our case plan, but in our direction as far as what we're looking at with transitional housing, because that's going to help them be more successful. As it relates to probation and parole, a couple of questions that are really not transitional housing, but
Yes,
are in that region. Do you have regions of the state that are broken up for like a northern region, central region? How many regions are there with probation?
there are 3 regions. You have the northern region, central region, and the southern region.
I had asked this question several weeks ago, and I've received some response. Are we fully staffed at probation and parole?
No, sir, we're not.
How far off are we?
I think right now we're probably, I would say, about 60%.
And probation and parole officers are sworn law enforcement, correct?
Yes, sir.
The starting salary, do you have any idea what that is?
Right at 33,000.
The job duties of a parole and probation officer, you think would be self-explanatory, but I don't want to rely on that. I assume you're monitoring people that are on probation and parole,
Correct.
which is a similar job, but a violation goes to a different person. If you're on probation and you have a violation, you go before the judge.
Correct,
If you're on parole, you go before the parole board.
correct.
As probation and parole, do you find that difficult that we have 2 different groups of people we report to, 2 different sets of rules? Is there anything there that would help us assist your people when someone has a violation? Is there a problem because there's 2 different types of remedies?
Mr. Senator, just from my experience doing this so long, I don't really think that's an issue. I've been able to, I've had multiple caseload with different supervisions on it, parole, probation. I think the thing that, and me just, being candid, what would help us is just having the tools we need to do our job, I think that would in itself will go a long way. You got to have vehicles, you got to have, everybody wants more money. It's competitive out here now. Everybody's paying sheriff's department, city, highway patrol. The start pays a lot more. So in order for us to stay afloat, we just got to be able to compete, or else, I can hire 20, I might lose 30 tomorrow. It's just got to have, I don't say stop the bleeding, but try to put a Band-Aid on it.
And these probation and parole officers, are they assigned to a specific county?
They are. And some have multiple, depending on like if you house arrest, I'm sure y'all have heard of intensive supervision, EM. If they have that type of caseload, they can have counties that are close, so multiple counties. But usually they're in the county in which they supervise.
What other job duties do they have other than monitoring people that are on probation and parole, house arrest?
Well, we kind of the force for the agency. So if things tend to happen in institutions, we have to come and, take control, shakedowns, transport in and out of states. So
That's a typical part of the job, is going to the institutions across the state to participate in, like you say, shakedowns or having to transport people?
well, it is now because, we have to, the commissioner's thing is we're all one team and we got to work together. So it's something that we've understand. We've done shakedowns since I've been here. So that's to be expected. Just some of the changes before the commissioner got here, with institutions not having the means to transport. So that kind of, we kind of took that role over as far as the transport in and out of state. And we're just better trained, I guess you can say, to deal with that type of stuff as far as, going to being a law enforcement, sworn law enforcement officer.
But as far as transport and, and I know this doesn't have a lot to do with transitional housing, but it has to do with people that are on parole and probation who very well may be in transitional housing. It takes you away from your day-to-day job. Some of the parole and probation officers have 150, 200 people that they're supposed to supervise.
Yes, sir.
That's a heavy load.
Yes, sir.
If I transport from Northeast Mississippi to Jackson and back, I've killed a day.
Exactly.
Are some of our parole and probation officers pulling shifts as guards at the institutions?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we are.
Why?
Right now, I think it's just because we're working hard to try to get the CO count up. They're extremely shorthanded also. So, we've had to assist them in the past year or so, pulling shifts at the prison and hospital details.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Spark. We're going to allow a few more questions to Mr. Blevins, one by Senator Norwood, followed by Senator Derek Simmons, who is joining us via Zoom.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Blevins. I represent Jackson, Hinds County,
Yes, sir.
and I don't like the fact that you all are constantly beating up on Jackson. The fact that Jackson, I think Jackson, the providers in Jackson, I think the Department of Correction and the state actually should be applauding Jackson for stepping up to the plate. And I know the monies that many of these guys have received have not been compensatory to what they have invested and they have put in.
Yes.
And now that we're receiving special appropriation or additional appropriation, I just hope and trust that the Department of Correction does not leave these guys out where they have been undercompensated, that they would be considered going forward. And also, as you know, many of the individuals that are released from the Department of Correction has been released to the streets in the city of Jackson that has caused additional challenges. So I don't think you will see Jackson jumping through the roof to get additional individuals released to them that they can't accommodate, but they want to be compensated for and I'm not speaking for the providers here in the city of Jackson, but through previous conversation, I think they would like to be compensated for those individuals that are released to their care so that they can do the best job and be paid for that.
Yes, sir. I don't think we'll have an issue with that. I mean, with the dynamics of everything, I don't think we can just exclude Jackson. I mean, I know I've worked with some providers here in Jackson that's doing a good job. So I think, I think we can kind of expand this without really just, getting rid of, some of the places we have. And I think that's what the senator's trying to go with this, is that we just need to get this spread out throughout the states where everybody have an opportunity to go back to where they're from. I don't think you'll have an issue with Jackson.
Let me just clarify now, I'm not asking that Era One that's placed in transitional housing be placed here in the city of Jackson. I'm not asking that.
I
I
understand.
mean, I agree with the concept of allowing or placing individuals close to where the jobs are or within proximity
Okay.
of where their homes are, but I'm just saying that to make sure that Jackson has, I'm sure we volunteered in many cases for this, or it was thrust upon Jackson. So I'm just saying that now that resources or additional resources are available, let's not put these guys out of business
Yes.
I mean, the job that you all are doing, we trust that you're gonna do the job and prepare them as much as possible and before they release. And yes, I agree with the concept that they go where the jobs are, where the best opportunity for them to be successful. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sir. And I understand.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on that question real quick, Senator Simmons, before your question. And that is that, again, by no means are we trying to take away anything from those providers who are in Jackson. Again, my plan is to make sure that individuals, when they are released somewhere where they may be closer to family or closer to home or closer to jobs. And at the same time, I do understand, and I know that the pay or however we've been paying these individuals who have these group homes over the years has been a probably set price for the last 20 plus years or however long it's been in existence. And we do have to pay them more. And that's another reason why the additional monies was made available so that we can compensate. And that we're making that I want to make sure that no one is paid more than the other when we talk about RFPs. So regardless if you're in Jackson or you're on the coast or wherever it may be, then I want all of those to be paid the same, because I mean, if you're providing the same service, then of course, then the compensation should be the same as well.
Yes,
I
sir.
want to clarify that. One other question I have for Mr. Pedro, and you can answer this later on, Mr. Pedro, is that what, again, I just need to know what considerations is, and you can answer this later on, you don't have to come now, but just need to answer. What consideration is MDOC doing to make sure that these people who are about to be released and they do not have transitional housing, what are you all doing to make sure that that problem is addressed so that we don't have to keep them there? I just need to know that before we leave today. Senator Simmons, I want to recognize you for a question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Commissioner, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I just got one or two general questions, and then I ask an overall question at the end. How many people do we currently have that have been released that are in transitional housing? Do we know?
Senator, I do not know that number offhand. Had I known this what the topic's gonna be today, I would have brought that information, have been better prepared. I apologize for that, but I can get it to Senator Barnett in the next day or so.
And that question is important because of what the chairman said, and also like what Senator Norwood said. It certainly is in the best interest of, I like to call them returning citizens, to go back to the area where jobs are, and also to go back to areas where family is or where they have a support base. So I like to see that data and to see as a policymaker how we are tracking those returning citizens. And so I guess my final question is, are we working as an agency with the providers in capturing that data, like capturing those returning citizens, how well they are doing in transitional housing. When they leave transitional housing, what, if anything, they are doing, because of course, we would like to know that information for recidivism. So are we working as MDOC with the providers and capturing the data for those individuals?
Yes, sir, we are. Each provider, they supply a monthly report every month, and Ms. McAfee, she handles, collecting data and keeping up with data and tracking all that. So anytime there's information that's needed, she can run a report where you can look at it to see, what's the recidivism rate for these folks that are, going to these places and getting out.
And I certainly commend, providers for being willing to do this work, because it is some very invaluable work to do. But as it relates to the effectiveness of those providers, I would also like to see you all provide to the chairman, where he can provide to the committee, anecdotal data as it relates to real life stories from those returning citizens on what they are experiencing as they go through this process and as they actually fully return to society. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir, no problem.
Thank you, Senator Simmons. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Blevins, for coming and speaking with us this morning.
Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. Now we would ask Reverend Siggers, who is joining us today, pastor of Mount Olive Baptist Church in Hattiesburg. And Reverend Siggers came as a request of mine to share with us what faith-based can do and would like to assist us with in regards to, as Senator Simmons said, those returning citizens that we're going to have re-entering society. So thank you again, Reverend Siggers, for coming and sharing with us information as it pertains to faith-based.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to come to address this committee. I'm Arthur Siggers, pastor of the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and the CEO of Breakthrough Community Services, small housing organization that we've been doing low to moderate income housing for about the last 20 years. Several years ago, we had an opportunity and always had a desire to do something in the area of transitional housing. And we were blessed to obtain 2 fourplexes. We got 24 beds. We have 20 filled at the time. Our major challenge has been funding. And we are small and choose to remain small. I think that for an organization to be in a community where a person may be from, that transition back to family and back to community is easier if we know the people and they know the people that they're coming back to. So we are, the frustration with me as a pastor is that in doing grants and trying to actually make contact with funding, it always seemed like the big fish eat up the little fish. And we're not interested in doing a statewide anything, but we do have some properties that we would like to expand. What we're doing right now, we have a partnership with drug court in Forest County, Lamar County, and Jones County. And those individuals, after they come out of incarceration, come to us. The Forest County provides the first month's rent. We provide a room, a shared living space, shared bathroom, but every individual have its own room and his own privacy. And I would entertain any questions you guys have for me.
Thank you, Reverend Sigurd. I think my question is it goes back again to MDOC, is that if we have organizations such as what Reverend Sigurd had, what or how do you all plan to engage them? And how do we get individuals or organizations like this involved? He said they have the capacity to have 24 beds. But what if there's another church organization out there, a faith-based organization that may be able to provide the same type of services? I think that's the reason why I wanted him to come. Not that we're looking at any favors for this individual, but to know that there are organizations out there like his that's willing to provide this so that people can have the opportunity to get back home. What do we do? How do we handle that? That's a question, I guess, for members of my committee as well. You know, how do we make sure that we're trying to get everybody as possible involved to make sure that, again, that when these returning individuals, as Senator Simmons said again, are returning, then we have used everything to our power to make sure that they have the best chance possible into re-entering society.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before a question, I guess, if I understood Deputy Commissioner Moreno earlier, that there's a pre-selection committee. I guess there needs to be a little bit more information drilling down on who's on the committee that's making the decisions to choose. Are we doing a traditional RFP? Sounds like to me we're giving $25 a day. That's $750 a month, roughly. If that's what we're doing, and we have interested parties, just like Reverend Sigurd here, that we look at the totality of the facility, just like Deputy Commissioner Blevins mentioned, how they work with MDOC, but also the programming. So that leads me to a question. Reverend Sigurd, you have housing right now, and you're obviously working with the drug court, which is a good relationship and shows a track record that you could work with MDOC. But do you have specific programming in this housing unit that you're talking about?
Within our program, we do have a 3-week NA meeting that the church provides. We have financial fit that we provide, and we have a relationship with businesses in the community. Employment hasn't been a problem. The vetting process had come through the drug court and through the probation officers, the referrals that they bring us, and the judges.
Generally, they've brought you somebody who's at some level of success within the drug court program already.
Right.
Do you assist in transportation, or is that up to the resident to get to their job?
We have not, we could, but they've been pretty, matter of fact, we got a problem with parking now. Everybody, as soon as they get a job, they get a car. So everybody is, so that doesn't seem to be a problem. The startup money, when a person first get out and before they get a job, and you know, we get calls of what do you give? What do you provide? You provide medical, you provide food, you provide, and what we want to know is what are you willing to do? Because we can't do everything, and we're not interested in creating a situation where people leave Parchman and come to our facility and sit there for a year.
That it's just a continuation of,
Pardon me?
you don't want a continuation.
Right.
Different
We want people
location.
To get integrated back into the community.
What is your typical stay as it relates to drug court? Because I know with drug court, it's usually a 3-year program. But someone could be put into drug court after they're released from MDOC custody. So do you have some long-term residents, or is most everybody cycled out after 6 months or a year?
Well, we were looking at and in conjunction with drug, we were looking at about a 2-year window that a person could be there. And that would run up almost concurrent with their drug court commitment if everything goes well.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgot my name, son, but anyway. Sir, you mentioned that, and how many you said you had, about 20?
24.
24, how many you have in there now?
I mean, we got 24 rooms, we got 20 people in there now.
All right, I say 20 now, all right. Okay, and you mentioned that, that you feel like that maybe the reason it works like it works is because you got people there that know who they are, they're part of the community, that kind of thing. Would you elaborate on that a little bit more?
What happens with us, brother, is that families usually have been burnt. But when a person gets out and if they've been working for 6 months or a year, that family gets a chance to see this person working, see this person purchase a vehicle that he didn't have or she didn't have, and it unites them and give that person an opportunity to get back to his family. Many people, probably about 6 months, especially if they got a kids or a spouse somewhere, they usually transition back to their family,
Okay, and
which is what we're looking for.
okay, that sounds really good. But again, I'm like you, Mr. Chairman. What would we have to do to get organizations like this some assistance? And I think that's kind of what you're saying, because they got a track record. And I mean, I know we got to do RFP and all that kind of stuff, but what can we do to help, I guess, move this program forward? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Exactly, Senator. That's exactly where I was. Hold on 1 second, Reverend Siggers. I think you had a question, Senator Norwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reverend Siggers, how you doing?
Good.
Good. So currently you have no individuals that's been transitioned from Department of Correction in your facilities now?
I don't know how you guys, most of these people have been arrested. I don't think they're coming from Parchman. They're coming from the local county jails. And if they've been locked up in Perry County, not Perry County, Lamar County or Jones County, we begin to get some people from there. Then they get an opportunity to make a choice, whether you want to do drug court, you want to do this program, or whether you want to stay where you are.
So if, should Department of Correction develop an RFP process and put it out, then you would be interested in applying to provide those services, and with the qualifier that the individuals are within the within at least within your area of
Yes.
service. Okay.
What, along with the oversight from the organization, the probation officer or parole officers, and their reporting that worked pretty good. We wanted to venture into receiving somebody out of a state facility because we have so many people in our area that have done state time, whether they should have or not, they done it. And when you're talking about coming back, this is my personal, but I just believe that a person will have a better chance of survival in Hattiesburg than Jackson, simply because he's not from Jackson. And it's sort of like moving your child to a city and they don't have no relatives. If they have children, you know it would be best if they had somebody that could drop the kids off. If you're in the area that you know people and people know you, and once people see you working and see you doing good, I think they're going to integrate them back into the church and back in the community.
I agree. Thanks. Thank you, Reverend Siggers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there any other questions to Reverend Siggers by anyone in the committee? If not, thank you, Reverend Siggers, for coming and sharing information with us today. Now we have, next presenter would be Mr. Leon Perry, who's the president, CEO of New Way, Mississippi. Yes. Did I say Leon? I'm sorry, Mr. Larry Perry. I'm sorry. Please excuse me for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the committee for allowing us the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Mississippi Reentry Coalition and New Way, Mississippi. Whom I have some of the coalition members with me today. I first want to say that I also serve on the housing committee for the Mississippi Reentry Coalition. New Way, Mississippi has been providing transitional housing for over 25 years in the state of Mississippi in Hinds and Simpson County. And with that being said, the Reentry Coalition believe that it is very important and vital that the community partner with the Department of Corrections and the state in order to deal with the issues of returning citizens. And that's what we're all about, is how can we be a resource to the state in terms of that, because the bottom line is these men are returning to our communities. We have an obligation and to do what we can as faith-based community, as well as the corporate community as well. And one of the things I will say in listening to the previous speakers is that there are a lot of challenges that come with this particular population. The men that are on parole today, which there's a number of them. Right now I have pretty much about 42 in my facilities today, and a list of them consistently coming out. But at the same time, these men come out, they have different challenges. Mental health challenges, some of them have substance abuse issues, and a lot of these things are hindering them from being able to be successful, from being able to get a job. So over the last 25 years, 12 years ago, New Way, Mississippi was the first transitional housing contractor with the Department of Corrections. New Way, Mississippi has contracted with 4 different administrations of the Mississippi Department of Corrections in terms of providing transitional services. We say transitional services is not just the housing component, but it also has to be a transitional employment and a family reunification component. It has to be a comprehensive approach. However, one agency cannot provide all these services alone. MDOC cannot provide all of these services alone. So therefore, it has to be a united effort between the Department of Corrections, community-based organizations, churches, corporations, as well as other service providers in the local communities. So when we look at why are people being released to Hinds County, over the last, even though I've been with New Way Mississippi 25 years, I've been providing these services for 31 years. One of the things that I realize is that every community that has social and economic oppression, where there's no job opportunities in rural areas, even though these people may have been incarcerated in those counties, they are not going to return to those counties because there's no job opportunities. There's no family support to help them. It's not that they don't want to go on. So they find themselves in Hinds County because it is a populated area. It has economic opportunities, and therefore they go to work. And one of the things I've realized is that I get men in my program. I realize that these men are not incarcerated for singing too loud in the choir. They have issues. So when they come out, it's a challenge sometimes for them to get a job. Some of them didn't work when they went into the prison system. So they have to be trained, which I applaud the Department of Corrections program that they have now in terms of the training, preparing these men so when they get out, that creates a better person, a better applicant for transitional housing. Because then they're one step further to being independent. We've realized over the years, we've got an employment training program that we partner with private foundations, and we raise money in order to provide services. And one of the things that we do is we provide services, employment internally, where we actually, the mayor of Jackson, the city of Jackson, realize that, hey, you know what, we got paper to pick up. You got a program with ex-offenders, we need labor. So we partner with them and we're able to pay these men $8 to $11 an hour just to pick up paper. Now that's doing transition. What that does is allow these men to generate monies so that they can have something when they leave, because in 6 months, they've got to leave. They've got to transition on because we are a nonprofit, 501c3. We're not a state funded. We came along in 2012 with House Bill 585, which was a non-funded mandate. And New Way, Mississippi got those bids. We were up to 120 bids at one point. But during the pandemic, men stopped being released. We had to begin to close down bids. We get $20 a day, okay? Our contract started in 2011, and we got $20 a day in 2011. Today, we get $20 a day, okay? So that does not pay for what we have to do. But what I'm saying is that the bottom line is over 25 years, and you look at the dynamics of reentry, it didn't just start, okay? Over the years, what we've had to do is look at how do we be innovative. And the contract with the city of Jackson allow us to generate jobs. And it also help us to a certain degree pay the light bill. Maintenance, we probably spend $1,000, $1,100 a month on maintenance because some of these men will tear your facilities up, okay? It's just some of them have behavior issues. Not all of them, but some of them. And what I want to say today is there's a lot of different dynamics that come with transitional housing and transitional services. But at the end of the day, I would say that the most rewarding thing that I've done in my life is provide transitional services. And I say that because there are so many men and women, because of transitional housing, have been able to return to their communities. They've been able to support their children. So the exponential impact of us helping one client has been 50. They're gonna impact their community. They're not gonna steal from them. They're not going to abuse their children. They're not gonna neglect their children. So the exponential impact of helping one offender be successful is tremendous. In 2022, we provided transitional services to 335 men. Year to date, 2023, we provided services to 191 clients coming through our transitional program. We've had 23 abscond to date. Last year, we had 41 abscond. No, we're not a detention center. We're transitional housing. So, we don't have jail. So we call on parole officers who work tremendously close to us. Why is this important? Because the bottom line is when a client is released to New Way, Mississippi, or any other transitional provider in the state, when that client leaves us, MDOC know within 12 hours that client is not accounted for. Well, if that person just released into the community in an address, that person may be missing until the next reporting day. So he could recommit. So the public safety issue is important in providing transitional services. Another thing I want to say, over the last 25 years, I've learned that the not in my backyard phenomenon, okay? Now, transitional housing is not gonna work in every community just because I'm filled with the Holy Ghost and I want to do transitional housing. Okay, I've dealt with that phenomenon in different locations. But over the years, one thing I have done is develop relationships with churches, businesses, law enforcement officers, sheriff departments, which they know, okay, if he's with New Way, then they're supervising him and we can work with them. So there are certain areas that when you go in there and don't say I'm with MDOC, oh man, something just, it's a fear factor that comes with that. So the bottom line is when we talk about transitional housing, transitional services, we need them all over our communities. However, there is a process and an approach that we need to make in terms of setting those locations up. Why don't more folks do transitional housing? Well, it costs us a lot of money just to qualify for transitional housing. $1 million general liability insurance. You gotta have reporting, you gotta have staff. You can't run these with one person. You gotta have staff, you gotta have data. There's so many, you gotta have transportation, you gotta have vehicles, you gotta have case managers. All that costs money, and $20 a day just not gonna cut it. We have a per diem reimbursement contract with MDOC, which means if a person is not in that bed, we don't get paid, okay? We had a 120 bed contract with MDOC. Why don't we have that now? Because we had to begin to shut them down during the pandemic. Because when they weren't being released, we were paying the light bill, we still had staff, we still had overhead, but that $20 a day went away. The initial contract with MDOC, with the first contract in 2011, was actually $40 a day. But at that particular time, the commission said, well, I gave them a figure, it cost us $53 a day. We're asking MDOC for 40. So, well, Larry, we can give you 20. You get your other 20 from the clients when they go to work. So, okay. We were already providing transitional housing before we contracted. So the $20 a day, it allowed us to be able to help more and to provide more services in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Perry, for sharing with us the services that New Way and others like you throughout the state of Mississippi have made available to those returning individuals. And we appreciate that. And we do understand the frustration with $20 a day not being sufficient enough to provide the services that you all would like to provide. But I would like to let you know, that I don't know if you're aware, but I know many of my committee members are, and others in the room are aware that I pushed against sheriff's departments across the state of Mississippi, not for asking for additional monies that's needed, but I pushed back because I don't like to give additional monies because you say you need to keep the lights on. I don't like giving additional money because you say you need more cars. I would like to give additional monies if you can tell me, or if you can show me that you're in the business of helping to fully return individuals back to society versus warehousing them. And that's been a problem that I see, is that we ask for additional monies so that we can warehouse individuals.
Mr.
and not
Chairman,
give
you
them-
sound like a conservative fiscal Republican. We'll get you.
Well, I'm
the-
sorry, you
we'll get-
liberal on that, not me. I'm sorry, that's your fault. But that's always been a concern of mine, even before I was a chairman, is that why are we spending so much money to make sure that people can stay warehoused and not give them or not be able to provide some of the services that they may need, so that when they get to New Way or when they leave New Way, then they really have a fighting chance. And again, this is nothing against New Way or anyone else, but when we ask for monies, I need for individuals to tell me what type of services that you're willing to provide to make sure that it's justified by, I'm sure not just only me, but other members on this committee, other people at the legislatures, because I want to make sure that Mississippi and those people who are returning, they have gotten every penny out of that dollar that we poured into them, to make sure that they don't come back, to make sure that they are productive citizens when they are released. So again, when when y'all ask for monies, and again, I've told the sheriff, I've told the regional jails the same thing. Don't come to Jackson and show up in 100 of you all to say, hey, we got to have some money because the deal that we made 20 years is not sufficient enough. Well, the deal that was made 20 years ago probably didn't have anybody asking for any accountability to make sure that that you provide services instead of providing beds. And that's what I'm looking for is services. Surely they need somewhere to go. But if we're just gonna provide a bed, then we can just leave them where they are. But if we're gonna provide an opportunity, if we're gonna provide services, then we can all agree that this money well spent. And I do know that Senator Butler, who I'm not gonna forget your name this time, Senator Butler, followed by Senator Norwood, have questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In all due respect, Mr. Chairman, $20 too low. I'll give it there, how we say that, $20 too low. Okay, and we got to, because when you don't have the money, not able to pay staff, you're not able to get quality people. And so that's a whole nother ballgame, but that's not my question. And I think you alluded to this, Mr. Larry, that they are there for 6 months.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is there do you have some kind of success rate of your program on, and again, I want to applaud you for what you do. I mean, again, I guess I'm the newest kid on the block. I only been on this committee a couple of years, and I'm learning a lot, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for opportunities like this to help us understand what's happening. But again, I applaud New Way for what they do. and what they are trying to do for the amount of years they have done that. And again, that's kind of what we've been talking about from the beginning, is on how we get more new ways, how we get more companies that are willing to come in and help us with the transition. But again, back to my question is then, do you have some kind of success rate on how your program work in the community?
Yes. Thank you, member, for asking that question. We have a high-tech data collection process. And we're part of the continuum of care HMIS system, which everybody that comes in are required tracking once they enter the program, and the discharge planning starts once they walk in the door. To answer your question, while they're with us over that 6-month period, we have a 73% success rate, which means that a client that comes out and come to our program, 72 to 75% are going to complete the program. The issue is when they leave us, we don't have the staff or the resources to track them beyond when they leave us, because that requires a position to work with the state to be able to track if they go back into the system.
Okay, so they with y'all 6 months. So after then, you don't know what's up. You don't know what's happening.
Well, we do a discharge. Each one of them have to be discharged to a location. In other words, when they leave out of our system, they're either gonna go back home, they're gonna have their own address, or they're gonna be released to another program. Some of them have substance abuse issues. Some of them we release to Harbor House or a drug treatment center because they can't seem to overcome substance abuse or chemical dependency. But there is one of the things that I would say, and what I alluded to earlier with the funding, is that sometimes I heard the committee members say that, we've been at this decades. Well, I can tell you why we've been at a decade. It requires resources. It requires positions. It requires tracking in order to reform the system that we have. We talk about transition, or we talk about, well, that program not good. It's not necessarily that the program is not good, it's that they're working with bell and wire, chewing gum and bell and wire. They're doing the very best they can with a good heart. So sometimes they have to reduce their capacity in order to provide a quality service, which then dilutes their budget.
And that's kind of what I was alluding to, Mr. Larry, is that when you don't have the funds, you're not able to get that quality people to help you transition and do the things you need to do. Again, I applaud you for what you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Perry, for coming here today. And I can speak for the program because I visited and shared with the work that he has done. And I can assure you, he's done more than he's gotten paid for. And I feel very comfortable that if the resources are available, that he would be able to do a comparable job with the resources being available that is required of him. But I have one final question, I guess, Mr. Chairman, and I guess this is probably go to Mr. Pedro and Mr. Perry as well, I guess. As far as, to my employment opportunities, you're talking about driving license, you're talking about all of those things. One of the most precious right that an individual can get returned to them is their right to vote. Now, Commissioner Kane stated prior to when he came for confirmation that he could support the restoration of the individual's rights once they have completed their census, all of the requirements, and they're returned into the mainstream society. Now, you support that? Are you working with your men to get their records expunged and those that can get the records? Are you working with them on doing that?
Yes, sir. As part of the reentry coalition, we do have different agencies that come in and train them and educate them on what crimes are expungable and which ones are not. And when are they eligible? So yes, sir, we are working closely with them on that. We believe in that.
Okay. Are you familiar with that, Mr. Pedro? Could you come to the mic so I can,
So your question is about restoration of rights?
correct?
Yeah. Well, the commission is very supportive of getting former inmates restored as much as possible, to the point that he has hired former inmates from Louisiana who are working here as part of the correctional system to help people inside the prison. So we have several of them. So he wants them to have, full restoration as much as the law allows. Of course, as I said before, there's 40,000 obstacles by law, federal and state and other. But we are supportive of them being fully restored as much as possible.
As voting citizens in the state.
Well, that's up to the legislature, I guess, but we would like for them to have, a job, a family, a life, they paid their dues, they paid their sentence, they completed their sentence, they should be able to be back into the community like anyone else.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perry, you've mentioned the Mississippi Reentry Coalition several times. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It's a coalition that was founded about 2 years ago with the focus of pulling in different agencies around the state and different stakeholders from each county in the state to make sure that we can do what we can do in terms of giving opportunities and supportive services to returning citizens. So I have some of the members with me today, and we're constantly inviting members to come and be a part of that as we recruit. And some of them I met today, I think we're gonna be trying to recruit some of them. But it's all about how can we come together as a community of stakeholders to try to do what we can in terms of helping reentry in the state.
And you said this is a statewide effort.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the continuum, the HMIS system. Is that something that's associated with MDOC, or is that something unique to your group?
It's actually mandated by HUD, not federally. In order to qualify for HUD funding, you have to be a part of a continuum of care. And so we're part of the Central Mississippi Continuum of Care that actually afford us, of course, we have to pay. I think it's $1,200 per user in order to use that system. But it's a system that keeps you from duplicating services. It's a very, very good system.
So you get funding from the federal government through HUD. That's just one of the requirements.
No, I don't get funding from HUD right now. We apply. We get different monies that may come from like the CDBG funds. That's HUD monies in order to get into that, but we're not directly funded, even though we've applied, but for some reason, some of this population don't qualify, so we're working on that as well.
How long have you been in that Central Mississippi Continuum of Care?
We've been in it, and we've been a member of that, Brandon, about 5 years. About 5 years.
You had mentioned a lot about data, and I do believe the chairman, I know I feel this way, and a lot of times the members, the more data you can put in front of us that represents real people and what happened, and you mentioned 72 to 75% of the people complete your program. Tell me a little bit about your program.
Okay, it's a 6-month program, and the applicants actually come through MDOC. they actually apply. We have an application that's in MDOC's data system. The case manager with MDOC assists the client, the offender, in filling out the application. And my case managers and my data collection group in New Way review the application. And then we actually submit an approval or disapproval. And at that point, it goes to the parole board. And then they're actually approved to be released to us. Once they're released to us, we do an intake process, which consists of a needs assessment. What's the family dynamic of this individual? Where can he go once he complete the program? What kind of job skills do we have? What type of skills did he receive while he was with MDOC? Then what we do is put him on a track towards success. And oftentimes what we do, the first 30 days, we put them into our employment training program, which is a vetting process to look at their work skill, their work ethic, their personality, their communication skills, so we can determine what best job opportunities that might work best for him. When he enter that program, then he goes to level 2, which is more of a independent living, which will be our level 2 on Medical Plaza. And during that process, that person then began work. He paid $50 a month incidental fees to the program, which is not to fund the program, but what it does is allow him to begin to contribute to incidentals. And then we track that individual. We do a weekly, what we call progress report, which we share that information with the Department of Corrections, Parole, Community Corrections, so that they can be shared information. Once that person completes the level 2, then they're eligible for graduation. At that point, then we feel that if they take full advantage of the program, then they are less likely to return and they're able to be more independent.
As far as the resident, what do you do about people that have medical needs like medication? Because I know sometimes you talk about mental health issues. How do you address those issues?
Yeah, a lot of them do come out. Some of them have on psychotropic medication, but according to the application they approve, they have to be stable on the meds. MDOC technically give them 30-day supply of medication. And if they have a mental health, they have to level, what is the level that we don't approve? Level C? Yeah, if they're not level C, we can approve them even though they have mental health issues. Physical health issues, we look at the limitation. Can they climb a stair? Can they walk? Can they take care of themselves? Can they go to the restroom? So we do take a lot of those guys that may be disabled, but they're functional.
You mentioned you had 120 beds at one point. Did you have everything in a general facility, or were you spread out across multiple facilities?
Multiple facilities. We had, which we still have 28 beds on Robinson Road. We have 15 on Medical Plaza in South Jackson. We had 60 beds in Simpson County, which we still have that facility, but we converted that to more of a veterans home because once the pandemic hit, then there were some other issues with the sheriff department and issues like that. But we also have 4 level 1, R1 facilities. So they're multiple, but the level 1, everybody that comes in through our reception center, which is on N Street off of Robinson Road. And once they come in there, then they move up to the next level, which is Medical Plaza, and throughout the program.
You had mentioned some people that had absconded. I'm assuming based on your close relationship with MDOC, that it's a requirement of their parole to stay in your program, and otherwise they are absconded.
That's right. Yeah, the accountability.
The $20 a day, is that an annual contract that you sign, or are you working under a 10-year-old contract, or?
Well, that contract, it's a 5-year contract with 3 years with 2 one-year renewables. And I think we did our final 1-year renewable this year. So it's actually up, I think, in March. I have to get with my CFO, But I think it actually is up for renewal in March.
And then the last question, because I think I've heard two different things. I asked Mr. Moreno, did they pay for empty beds? And I understood him to say yes, but I understood you to say no.
Absolutely not. Unless, it may be something new. Like I said, this is my fourth commissioner, so,
But typically you're paid for numbers of heads in beds.
right, number of, if client is in the bed, he get paid when he's discharged, and I submit that discharge, that $20 stop right then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I like what I hear. New Way is a private nonprofit, is that correct?
Right, private, nonprofit, 501c3.
And so y'all get donors, is that right? Or do you?
That's the concept.
That's the concept.
Yeah, right,
Okay,
yeah, we have some donors, our partners with, churches, some of them support us, but we're eligible for tax deductible donations.
well, I guess that's my question. Are you my understanding is there's a lot of national groups that are into this, let's say. And so are y'all tapping into the grants that they offer?
There are a lot of grants out there. There's a lot of organizations nationally. It's a real competitive process,
Okay,
nationally. And oftentimes it's about your relationship. So I'm constantly trying to develop relationships. And I think with the Mississippi Reentry Coalition, that even more, I think is going to help us develop relationships. Now, we do have a couple of foundations that support us.
okay. And do you mind naming them?
I prefer not to.
Okay,
publicly.
okay.
I'll be happy to share it with you.
Yeah. And the reason I'm asking is because what I see and hear, I like. And so it's going back to the chairman's earlier point. It's replicating it throughout the state. And so if we have national donors who this is their mission, then we could replicate it. And I handle the Department of Corrections budget.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And it's always, I know we would love to have money that, ad infinitum that we could give. But what seems to me that has tended to work was public-private partnerships, private nonprofit partnerships. And so that's why I'm inquiring about this of doing that. But in terms of the MDOC budget, I mean, it's gotten the most increases over the last number of years. We've had to do all that. So I'm just searching for a way that people in your situation can partner, or that we can incentivize, because it does seem that there's national organizations and foundations that this is what they do. And if we can tap into that, then we can work together to make this happen. And maybe that's what the Reentry Commission can look at. So,
Right. And I think too, it goes a long ways when you get letters of support from committees like yours and state signing off on what we're doing, and different MOUs and actually partners. I think that's what make the donors look at you more close in terms of funding you. So I'm definitely interested in that as the CEO of New Way and as a member of the Reentry Coalition.
when you say those things are really competitive, what do you mean?
Well, if there's $1 million grant out there, there are probably 100 organizations, if not more, going after that million. And they may have a maximum of $100,000 or $200,000 per grant. So they're probably only going to fund maybe 8 or 10 of those agencies.
So this is a national issue.
Well, yeah, and then some of these organizations nationally already have that personal relationship
Okay.
with these different foundations. But we're working on that too, trying to develop more relationships. We're doing some website, things on website, trying to get out there in terms of letting people know, hey, the Reentry Coalition exists, New Way Mississippi exists, and other agencies that's a part of the coalition exists. So I think we're doing some things over the last 2 or 3 years that we was not doing prior to now. So the efforts, I think, is more out there. And even the more having the opportunity to come and speak to you all today, I think goes a long ways to even more kind of helping with that approach and that process.
Yeah, and I'll finish with this. My experience has been these national donors want to see that things are working and that you're committed, and then the money starts flowing, so to speak. So I think that's what you're saying.
That's right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions to? Okay, but I would like to say one thing. Senator Norwood, you asked the questions in regard to restoring the rights for an individual. I just want the committee to know, for those who don't know, is that, when the individual is released, it's 5 years from the time that they're released that they can start applying to have their records expunged. So regardless if New Way or any of the rest of them started working with them on it, there's a process that has to happen for that to happen. So I guess I'm saying that to say that if there's something that needs some attention on that, we have to come through the legislative process. So that's something that we would have to work on to try and fix that. That's not anything that they could be doing, because the law says that it's a 5-year wait, and even when they're released, to start asking for that to be expunged. So that would have to be a legislative measure that we would have to take on while we're in session.
Okay, now, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly I understand that, but I think there are things that they can be working on even while they're incarcerated, and once they're released to parole or transition, to make sure that at the appropriate time that they would be in a position to accept that. That's basically what I'm saying there.
Understood. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions?
I would like to ask, do we have any other providers here today of those services? I see Ms. Rogers is here, and do we have any other providers here?
I'm not sure. When I made the request, I did make the request that all be notified in here, but because of time, then we only had one presenter for each one of those areas that we have listed here today.
Well, I mean, do we have a few minutes that we can hear from Ms. Rogers? Because I think that, Ms. Perry, you deal specifically with men.
Right. We used to do women, but economically, we had to close it down about 4 years ago during the pandemic.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Any objection that we hear a word from Ms. Rogers, Mr. Chairman?
It's about 11:05 right now, and I want to end at 12, so I would allow her maybe 10 minutes, but to explain to us what she does or what her organization does, but because of time, then we will probably limit the questions for her. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of you. My name is Pauline Rogers. I'm with the Reaching and Educating for Community Hope Foundation. I operate the Wendy Hatcher Safe House. Wendy Hatcher was the first woman chaplain that was hired by the state of Mississippi. I'm formerly incarcerated. I've been out over 3 decades, and it was there in my incarceration that I learned of some of the problems that's still being addressed here today. Having said that, I am the oldest serving reentry provider in the state before reentry was sexy, before reentry got its groove. We've been here, and to the gentleman's here record, our record is over 3 decades, 0 recidivism. We are in fact now writing a manual for recidivism and what we see that it is everybody's responsibility in reducing recidivism. It's not just the incarcerated, and we've had to learn how to do this without funding, without grants. And I'm very familiar with the New Way. Our organization has been a supporter in services to some of their clients, to goods. We have large partners. World Vision, who is this country's oldest humanitarian organization. When people leave us, we have an indefinite stay. And we've learned to do that because when we got in this work almost 4 decades ago, we didn't have a model. So we had to work from, I'm the oldest of 11. My mother it's okay. We have, I don't know where I was, 4 decades of doing this, we didn't have a model. So we had to create, from my experience, being the oldest of 11, watch my father be killed when I was a little girl, spiraled down, ended up in incarceration for shoplifting. And I have to thank Senator Daniel Sparks, who publicly apologized some years ago that there was a bad piece of legislation that sent me to prison because of shoplifting. I was guilty. True enough, I was guilty. But I ended up in incarceration, and that's when I saw all the problems, and have been doing this in reentry done right, reentry housing, transitional housing done right, done correctly, keep our communities safe. And I will say that we often hear from a lot of people that do this work, but I will say that I brought with us 3 residents who are here in our housing. We have Barbara, who served 38 years in prison, have been with us a year, doing exceptionally well, working. Tiffany, who's been with us a year, and Veronica, who has been with us going on 3 years. And I will use Veronica, and I don't mean to put her on the spot, but it's something. Veronica is one of the worst cases that I have ever seen of failure in the Mississippi Department of Corrections by case management. We just 2 days ago got Veronica an SSI check. She has been living in abandoned homes. I got her to write her, getting her to write her story to tell people what it's like to live in abandoned homes, where the system, every system that she encountered failed her. She's never worked. And the last doctor that I took her to, told the doctor, I don't mean any disrespect, but you don't have to be a professional to look at her and know that there were some disabilities or misabilities. And that doctor worked with us, several doctors did, and just 2 days ago, we just went to the bank, and I'm sorry I get full about this, that we are failing people who deserve a second chance. I thank Wendy Hatcher. When corrections, like Larry was saying, when we work together, we can do better. We can do better for people and do better for humanity. And all the decades of doing this, to Mr. Finance Chairman, we've saved this state over $17 million. And it's not what I can tell you, it's what we've done that can be proven. I worked with Steve Pickett, he still calls me to this day, working together, who was the former parole officer. Wendy Hatcher, I kept Wendy Hatcher in our home until she passed away. There's a correction officer now hospitalized. You have to, as Larry said, work together. And I'm proud of the record that we have. It's not sexy, it's not easy. When you have to deal with men who come out that have been incarcerated for so long, don't know the difference in a sink of running water from a urinal. You have to educate in these little small areas, or people who eat rotten food because they are accustomed to taking and hoarding what they have because the food system didn't allow them to go any further. So we got some issues, but you also have help here with myself and other providers that we can do better when we work together. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and sharing that with us, and your testimony was exactly what I've been trying to get MDOC and others to understand, is that we don't always have to do what's been traditional to make this work. It's our time to think outside of the box and to explore every possible avenue that there is to make sure that we can continue to get those kind of success stories out of individuals or groups like you who are willing to make that sacrifice in the community to make sure that those who are returning to our communities have a fighting chance of really returning to the community whole. So again, thank you again for that, for your testimony. And I can assure you that going forward in other hearings that we're going to have to make sure that the legislation that we put out is going to be the best legislation possible, that you will be included in those hearings. Again, thank you for coming and sharing with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and so at this time, we would have Miss, let me get this right, Louise Wasilewski. If I didn't get that correct, I'm sorry. Huh? I said Wasilewski, didn't I? Wasilewski?
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Barnett and senators, for the opportunity to speak here today. Yes, my name is Louise Wasilewski, and whenever the Delta agent says, "Would Mrs. Were," I answer. And I'm the CEO of Assimilate. We're a company based in Georgia Tech at the university, and we provide technical assistance and technology. In a lot of jobs, certifications are really important, and MDOC is working hard to get people certificates that are an independent validation of their readiness for work. And I have a few of those myself. But the most important part of my story is that when I was 14 years old, my father got a conviction. And as a result of that, he lost his job. He couldn't get hired again. He did the day laboring thing for a while, and my family almost lost their housing. So I'm showing up as somebody who works in the field, bringing macro level information to complement the micro level that you've heard here, in the hope that by bringing some of these best practices together with the resources that are in the community, you'll be able to build some really strong solutions. We cannot underestimate the importance of the link between housing, employment, and identity. And I really want to applaud New Way for having that transitional employment as part of their transitional housing model. There's no question that that is a best practice from across the nation. If some of what you've heard today is a little bit novel, I would recommend that you seek out a short movie called First Week Out. It was released in 2021, and it tells a story of a gentleman called Larry Williams, who served over 40 years in the Georgia Department of Corrections, and his journey first week out moving into transitional housing. It's an award-winning documentary, and it really brings home those personal stories that you've heard here briefly. I have the advantage of being perhaps the last speaker. So I've heard a lot of your questions today, and I don't want to read my slides. You all are perfectly capable of reading. But what I will try and do is just answer some of the questions that you all have asked and complement. So many of the barriers that exist are not obvious. It's things like people don't have a credit history, they don't have a bank account, they don't have a deposit for the first month's rent. They don't have utility bills that could be used for identity. They don't have an application fee. There are many barriers like that. And the new Reentry Academy that Mississippi DOC is introducing is going to really help with some of those things. It's a very focused effort, but there are other things that they can't do in advance. They can't change local statutes that might outlaw sex offenders. They can't provide transportation to employment when people are released. They can't provide people with a phone, but they might be able to connect somebody with a provider who can do that. But I also want to point out that one of the challenges that's not obvious is that often housing is not only a capacity problem, and you all have dug into, you know, how many beds, but it's also a matching problem. Do we have beds in the right places for the right types of people? And that's why when you heard the earlier testimony this morning, there are empty beds. And in fact, if you pick up the phone and call providers around the country, like I did, I called 35 providers at one point. And I asked them all, did you have any empty beds last night? And they all told me of 35, yes, we did. So that is, it's not only capacity, but it's also matching people to beds in the right locations. Another point I'll bring up is, I think you, Senator Sparks, have asked several times about people who are end of sentence. It's very important that people who are end of sentence have a stable place to land, just the same as people on parole. But it's not obvious that DOC can actually statutorily pay for that necessarily. So you might want to think about other ways. And then I think one of the other questions that came up from Mr. Perry, that HUD funding isn't always available. There is a statutory restriction that within 90 days of leaving an institution, and that's typically thought of as a hospital, you can't get HUD housing, but a prison also counts as an institution. So there are these statutory barriers that are maybe not terribly obvious. And some of them you might be able to do something about directly within the state, and some of them you might be able to encourage your federal representatives to work on. There are lots of things that can be done to lift barriers. One of the most important is to make it easier to find landlords who are willing to rent to people with a record. Georgia's done one of those where I'm based, but they're certainly not the only place. The emphasis that we've heard on employment is so critical. If you show up to rent a property and you've got an employer recommendation letter that you have a job, that makes a huge difference. That's no different for returning citizen than it would be for any of us in this room trying to go and rent. So this effort to get people lined up with employment. I had the opportunity to want to talk to one of the recruiters at Ingalls at the Mississippi Accelerate conference this week. They are willing to partner. If we can get people that job offer, that greatly improves their ability to get housing. Another thing that's not obvious is so many returning citizens are coming out without even a bank account. You can't exist without a bank account or a credit card. Cash basically doesn't exist no more. We work in the state of Arizona, and when they do their resource fair for parolees, every Thursday, they get everybody together. It's about 120 people show up. They bring a bunch of providers in Maricopa, and they often have Wells Fargo or a credit union there to help people open a bank account. Sounds trivial, but if you've been inside for a bunch of years, you know, those things get closed. North Carolina has done a really job of a really good job of tying in with their vital records agency. And they did it statutorily because it just wasn't working on an informal basis. So they actually passed the statute to enable and require vital records to work with Department of Adult Corrections. What I want to do now is share some different housing models from around the country. And perhaps most fundamentally, I would like to challenge the idea that RFPs are really the only answer. And the woman who spoke before me, and I'm sorry I didn't catch her last name, forgive me. She got started and doing what she was doing without any RFPs, with a lot of resourcefulness rather than a lot of resources. I think another thing is when you look at the cost of supportive housing, it's not necessarily the right answer to say, or the most productive answer to say, what is the cost per year? Another way of looking at it is to say, what is the cost per person? If you have a 6-month program, you get to serve 2 people in a year, right? If you have a 3-month program, you get to serve 4 people in a year. And so that's far more efficient to subsidize shorter programs and then get people paying rent than to assume you have to have 6 months or 12 months for success. And again, this whole idea of matching and supply, right? Getting a supply of people is just as important, and putting them in the right places. So if you listen to Mr. Perry, right, from New Way, he doesn't get money if his beds are empty. That means he has a supply problem, right? And so if we think about supply and demand, one of the things that DOC can do is improve that connection to make sure that there is supply where there is demand. And I was delighted to hear about the Mississippi Reentry Coalition, because I helped start the Metro Atlanta Reentry Coalition, right? And those coalitions are a way to connect supply and demand. So let's just talk a little bit about New Freedom from Arizona. That was started by 3 people with criminal records who'd served some pretty lengthy sentences. And they went to a gentleman who was known to be returning citizen friendly and a successful businessman. And they built a business case and they went and bought a hotel. They literally bought a Holiday Inn that had shut down and they have turned it into reentry housing, and it still has a pool. It has a gym. And they did that with private risk capital. And their source of revenue is Medicaid counseling. So they provide the counseling and support services that you've heard the providers here talk about how important they are. And they've done it in a way that is clinically accurate. And they are able to bill Medicaid for that. That's not an RFP with the state, but what they do have is a memorandum of understanding, which you could call a supply agreement. And so DOC or PMP will tell people about New Freedom and help them get connected. So they have a supply agreement. And that's a big multi-story, like 8-floor hotel or something. Another example I want to share with you is Vital Signs in Georgia, and that's a faith-based program. They actually now are part of the approved reentry housing list. And so people can get a voucher and take that voucher there to pay for their housing for the first 3 months. The rest of the time, it's all rent. You know, if you get people into work, they can pay rent. And paying rent is a really important part of being a responsible citizen, and it's a really important part of transition. And the way that Vital Signs works is they have single-family homes. They rent some, so they actually rent a property and then sublet, if you like, and they own some. They provide the case management that your local people have talked about here. And they put people in shared rooms. I think one of the gentlemen who spoke, perhaps the pastor, talked about everybody having their own room. Sometimes that's a good answer, but not always. If you are not used to being on your own, having a roomie is actually a good thing. And it allows you to double the number of people for the same cost of the accommodation. Now, obviously, food, laundry, those things increase. A new trend is tiny homes. I don't know if you've heard of tiny homes, but these little self-contained places. So Gateway in New Jersey, Bridges to Hope in Nebraska, and then there's a whole bunch of them in California. And these places are charging rent. They're using grants to get started. They may be getting operating capital from state or local government. And some of them are also using Medicaid because case management, for example, is Medicaid billable. And these can be intended to be long stay or intended to be transitional. Another example, Thor housing, is therapeutic housing with substance abuse or mental health counseling. So treatment is a core part of that. I don't want to miss mentioning halfway houses. But if you look at the federal halfway houses, those people are technically considered inmates. The federal government pays all their health care. That's not really what we're talking about with transitional housing, but I just want to draw that line so you can tell the difference. An area that is often overlooked is employer-supported housing, as in they make it available and their employees live in it. My great-grandfather worked on the railways in Britain, and the family lived in what was called tied housing. Here we had it with the mills, right? You worked at the mill and your housing came with your job at the mill. If you look at what's happened in the oil boom, employers were bringing in mobile homes for their staff. And this is the sort of thing that could maybe work with an Ingalls or maybe even a Nissan. And then I just want to share an answer to one of the questions, like, why won't families take people? And you heard a lot of good reasons, right? They burn their bridges, right? They've tried and tried and tried, and they just don't have enough faith left to try this time. They want to see, they're from Missouri, like my rental car. Show me if you've changed. Show me this time you're different. But it can also be a real financial challenge. And so what North Carolina did is they said, we will pay a supplement to families to take somebody. Like, why are you paying nonprofits or paying for-profits and you won't even support the family that is supporting that person? So that's one I forgot to put on my chart, but your question reminded me of that example. And I think the main thing I would like you to take away from this is there are lots of different options, and one size does not fit all. If you want to have housing spread around the country, you can't have a bunch of Holiday Inns everywhere. That doesn't make sense. But you can have smaller housing where it's appropriate, and then larger housing where it's appropriate. In general, the good reentry housing provides a collection of services, and case management is perhaps the most foundational, and I didn't even remember to write that down. And family reunification is also really important. That mental health often shows up as peer support. When you have a person talking to you who said, I lived there, that's what happened to me. There's a whole different level of credibility than somebody that's got an MCSW or something. But I also want to point out that you have to create a motivation to get to independence. There's a massive psychological transition that has to happen, and a lot of that involves self-management and learning that self-management and independence, but you've got to set that as a goal. So the sooner people are working and paying rent, the better that is to help with that transition. You have to set an expectation of when they're going to be moving out, And then you have to make that transition smooth as well. So a lot of places have what you might call an alumni group if it was a college, right? That people are then not left on their own, but they still have support. And that then helps with the question you all have been asking about statistics and success around follow-up, right? Alumni groups are the best way to get some follow-up. There are also some keys to being a successful sponsor, whether that's a financial sponsor or simply an MOU. So having the parole board or parole supervision agency approve makes a big difference, because that's more efficient for a parole officer if you can go see a bunch of people. But one of those obstacles was thou shalt not consort with other felons. That's a real common condition of supervision. Well, how do you get in shared housing that's affordable if you're not allowed to consort with other felons? So having that parole approval to take that worry away is a good idea. And a regular supply of people, that reduces financial risk for a provider. Really, this kind of housing, it's like rental housing. It's just a special form of rental housing. And any person operating rental housing is worried about their risk and keeping their facility occupied. Occupancy is the #1 measure for real estate success, right? Financial success. And then the strong network of partners, because nobody can do everything, right? Nowhere can do everything. Having a way to refer and share information really makes sense. And then I think another comment worth making is often it really does not help to send people back to the community they came from. That's where their dealer is, or that's where that abusive relationship is, or that's where absolutely nobody will talk to them because they remember what happened, right? Giving people a fresh start often means a fresh place. Just want to spend a moment on sex offender housing. In some states, sex offender housing is eligible for a higher subsidy. And that's an incentive, and it also helps with increased insurance expense. So we just had to get extra sexual assault insurance as part of satisfying a contract with one of our customers. It cost us an extra $10,000 a year, more than our whole policy, to get that kind of protection. And so if you're an employer, you're worried about this. If you're a housing provider, you're worried about this. So it is legitimate to increase the rate because there is a material financial expense associated with housing such individuals. In Georgia, when we originally passed subsidized housing as a bill, it explicitly excluded sex offenders. And the logic at the time was, well, we don't want to motivate we don't want to reward these people by giving them housing after the terrible things that they've done. So you all can tell I didn't grow up in Atlanta, but I have been there almost 30 years and I am a US citizen. And so I also, as a private individual, I'm here as an expert, but as a private individual, I will go to Justice Day at the Capitol and try and help pass legislation. And so usually that would be, me standing out there at the door waiting for you all to come out, like, ooh, who's he? Does he match the photo? That kind of thing. And so I had this one person in mind on the Senate Corrections Committee. And I ambushed him and I said, I'm here to support this legislation that will allow RPH housing to be extended to sex offenders. And he said to me right away, I have 3 little girls. I care about their safety. That's my #1 thing. And my response to him was, Senator, if you pay for their housing, you know exactly where they're sleeping. And if you don't, they could be sleeping in the piney woods at the bottom of your yard. And he looked at me and he said, I had never thought of it that way. And he became a bill sponsor of a bill that he was opposed to. And so often, and so much what you've heard at a personal level, like we have to get over some of our prejudices about how things have to be this way or they can't be the other way, and really look at what happens on the ground. And so often when we're thinking about post-release policy, we want to make sure we don't reward people who did bad things. But that's not the way deterrence really works, and certainly not in reentry. We have to be giving people a really firm foundation so they have, as you, Senator, said many times, that we're giving people a fighting chance. And then also make sure that we have that accountability so that they have no excuse. And I think that balance of a fighting chance and no excuses, that's really the definition of public safety and support. There are a lot of things that we can do to improve transitions. And I just want to spend a moment on a thing called the Norway model. And I believe one of the former commissioners, or perhaps some of the committee, may even have visited Norway. And the Norway model is about trying to make the change from incarceration to the community less of a cliff and more of a slope. And it's kind of based on three things: in-reach, progression, and normalcy. And, it's very easy in a state like Mississippi to say, we are nothing like Norway. Georgia is nothing like Norway, and to just want to discard that. But what I would say to you is those three principles are biblical principles in disguise. And I have spent enough time here to know that that is foundational for many people in this state. In reach, that's just Matthew 25. When I was in prison and you visited me. Doesn't get more foundational than that. Progression. Recognizing that people need to grow and circumstances need to change. When I was a child, I reasoned as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Normalcy, treating people who are residing in a correctional facility as people and with dignity. That is simply that all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That is that there is no difference between slave and free, between Jew and Gentile, between residing in a facility and residing in the community. So if you see Norway model anywhere, don't just go, that's nothing like us. Recognize that is exactly us, just with another label. Finally, I want to spend just a moment and talk about an idea of creating a revolving fund for housing options. So one of those bits of paper I've got is an MBA, and that teaches you a bunch about how to run business and raise money and finance and all that kind of stuff. And real estate is one of those things you look at. And a real estate investment firm simply takes a blob of money at the front and uses it to run a business over a long amount of time. And that's really the idea of a revolving fund. And so I believe that the state has opportunities to take seed funding, particularly in federal dollars. And you've got to write everything the right way, but you can use that to create down payments, if you like, to seed more providers or existing providers in new locations. And that should then be a combination of the large scale and the smaller scale of both owned and rented properties. And if there is that piece of equity, right, of ownership, you can borrow against that. Now, for nonprofits, borrowing is pretty tricky, right? But if you have a solid financial model, you can still borrow. You just have to go work with a CDFI or the right branch of one of the bigger banks. And so if you look at this sort of revolving fund model, you can take this one-time opportunity. I know there's still ARPA money left, but you talked about philanthropy, and use that to create a long runway with housing. there's a whole bunch of things that you can do to reduce expenses. You know, some places have used inmate labor to rehab facilities. Right? That's a double win because the inmates are getting skills and practice, and then it reduces expenses. And there's a whole bunch of things that could be done, whether that is a subsidy of land or an excess building that the state has that is no longer needed and could be transferred. And then finally, I want to share another thing that's far from obvious. There was a little bit of conversation earlier around grants and trying to get foundations interested. Foundations and philanthropy are just as interested in fiscal responsibility as you all are. And the trouble is, if you're a national foundation up in, I don't know, Detroit or Chicago or New York or California, you might want to help this area, but you have no idea who's doing good work on the ground. You have no idea if your money is going to be spent well. And so philanthropy is just as concerned about accountability. And the DOC or parole could be providing that sort of local accountability. So you might ask, what is the purpose of a memorandum of understanding? No money is changing hands in a simple memorandum of understanding. But what that MOU is, it is an endorsement of a provider that they have met a particular standard. And you talked about how hard it is to get qualified. It's not just you need a fire extinguisher. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that is one of those things, right? It is insurance. It is training. So MOUs provide a way to say somebody is watching over these people and making sure there are no shenanigans going on. That is meaningful. Another thing is getting grants. It's kind of like getting a job. You know what they say about getting a job? If you want to get a job, you've got to have a job, right? You've got to get a job to get a job. And it's like this circle that I showed at the beginning. In the same way, if you want to get a grant, you've got to have already gotten a grant. Like, well, how do you, like, what do you do with that? So one of the nonprofits that I served on the board of in the justice reform space, we got this little $5,000 grant from an arts fund. And then that allowed us to, like, we spent it and we kept our books. And then that allowed us to get a $25,000 grant. And then that allowed them to go get a $50,000 grant and to gradually build up. That takes years. But something like the sponsorship idea can really, like, give you a leg up. And so these sorts of things might not be obvious, but I hope by putting some of them on the table, I've got you to think that there are a bunch of different ways to kind of skin the housing cat. And it isn't one size fits all. And thank you again for the opportunity to present some of these ideas to you. And obviously you've got my contact information if you have follow-up questions.
Thank you, Ms. Louise. Is there any questions from anyone on this committee to Ms. Louise?
Just very briefly, and it's something maybe you can supplement with, but if you've been doing work out of Georgia and you've been doing it for a number of years, we would certainly entertain looking at anything they've used over there that seems to have worked for them. I think if you would follow up with that to the chairman, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else with any questions? If not, then we will conclude this meeting of several more that I plan to have prior to the session starting. And thank you all again for coming. I think this was probably one of the most informative meetings that we've had thus far, and especially in the area of housing. And I think we can all understand how important transitional housing is. It's not just a place where we want somebody to have an opportunity to lay down at night, but a place where they can really have an opportunity to transition back into society. So again, thank everyone for coming. Again, and especially thanks again to all of my committee members, but I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the Lieutenant Governor's staff and those who came to be a part of this, as well as my committee assistant, Ms. Anita, for getting all the information together, notifying everybody of the meeting. So again, thank you all again, and this is, at this time, we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you.